December 7th, 1971. A month had passed since anyone had seen the List family. Their massive Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey, sat in an odd state. Every light in the 19-room home blazed day and night. But no one came or went. No movement behind the windows, no cars in the driveway. The neighbors had grown concerned. They called the police. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They knocked. No answer. They circled the property, peering through windows. Then they found it. An unlocked basement window. Officer after officer descended into that basement. What they found inside would become one of the most calculated and cold-blooded family murders in American history. In the grand ballroom, under an expensive stained glass ceiling, lay 4 bodies on sleeping bags. A mother and her 3 children, all shot in the head. In the attic apartment, an elderly woman's body. 5 people, an entire family wiped out. But the killer was gone. And he had planned it that way. This is the story of John List, a Sunday school teacher, a devoted churchgoer, a quiet accountant, and a man who murdered everyone he loved, then vanished into thin air for nearly 2 decades. Before we dive into this case, if you're interested in more true crime stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Now, let's get into the full story. John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. He was the only child of John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List, both German immigrants who brought with them strict Lutheran values and an unwavering belief in discipline, duty, and religion. John's father was already 66 years old when John was born. He was stern, controlling, and believed that a man's worth was measured by his ability to provide for and protect his family. Failure was not an option. Asking for help was shameful. These lessons were drilled into young John from the moment he could understand words. His mother, Alma, was 38 when she gave birth to John. She was overprotective, smothering even. She rarely let John out of her sight. He had few friends growing up. While other children played outside, John stayed indoors, studying scripture and attending church services. By all accounts, John was a quiet, obedient child. He never got into trouble. He did well in school. He became deeply religious, just like his parents wanted. But beneath that calm surface, something else was forming. A need for control, a fear of judgment, and an inability to handle failure. John graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943. That same year, America was deep into World War II, and John enlisted in the United States Army. He served as a laboratory technician far from the front lines. His father died in 1944, while John was still in service. By the time John was discharged in 1946, his father's voice was still in his head: provide, protect, never fail. John enrolled at the University of Michigan, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and later a master's degree in accounting. He was also commissioned as a lieutenant through ROTC. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. John was building a respectable life, a career, a future, but there were cracks already forming. In November 1950, as the Korean War escalated, John was called back to active duty. He was stationed at Fort Eustis in Virginia, where he met a woman named Helen Morris Taylor. Helen was a widow. Her first husband, an infantry officer, had been killed in action in Korea. She had a daughter named Brenda from that marriage. Helen was older than John, and she carried herself with confidence. Some who knew her said she could be demanding. Others said she knew how to get what she wanted. John and Helen married on December 1st, 1951, in Baltimore, Maryland. It seemed like a fresh start for both of them. But the marriage was built on a lie. Helen had pressured John into marrying her by claiming she was pregnant. She wasn't. She also insisted they marry in Maryland, which didn't require a premarital syphilis test like most other states did at the time. Helen knew why. She had contracted syphilis from her first husband and never told John. By the time John found out years later, the disease had already begun to damage her body and mind. After John's military service ended in 1952, the couple moved to Michigan and then to Kalamazoo. John worked as an accountant at a paper company. Between 1955 and 1958, Helen gave birth to 3 children, Patricia, John Frederick, and Frederick. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American family. But inside the home, things were falling apart. Helen was an alcoholic. As the years went on, her drinking got worse. The untreated syphilis was also taking its toll, affecting her mental state. She became paranoid, reclusive, and verbally abusive. She would humiliate John in front of others, mocking him, comparing him unfavorably to her first husband. John, raised to believe that a man must endure and never complain, said nothing. He buried his frustration. He went to church. He prayed. He tried to keep everything under control. But control was slipping. In 1960, John moved the family to Rochester, New York, where he took a job with Xerox. He eventually became director of accounting services. It was a good position, stable, respectable. But in 1965, John made a decision that would change everything. He accepted a job as vice president and comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. With the new position came the need for a bigger home, something that reflected his success. He found Breeze Knoll. It was a 19-room Victorian mansion on Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. It had 3 floors, a ballroom with a stained glass skylight rumored to be a Tiffany original, and a price tag the List family could barely afford. But John's mother, Alma, now in her late 70s, was going to live with them. She had money saved, and John convinced himself they could make it work. They moved in, and almost immediately, the financial pressure began. The house was expensive to heat, expensive to maintain. The mortgage was crushing, but John couldn't admit failure. His father's voice echoed in his mind. A man provides, a man protects, a man does not ask for help. By 1971, everything was collapsing. The bank where John worked closed down and he was laid off, but he couldn't bring himself to tell his family. Every morning he put on his suit, picked up his briefcase, and left the house as if he were going to work. Instead, he spent his days at the train station, reading newspapers and going to job interviews that led nowhere. He started taking money from his mother's bank account to keep up with the mortgage payments. He encouraged his children to find part-time jobs, telling them it would teach them responsibility. In reality, he needed their income to keep the family afloat. Helen's condition worsened. The syphilis had reached its final stage. Combined with her drinking, she had become, in John's words, an unkempt and paranoid recluse. She stayed in the house, rarely going out, her behavior increasingly erratic. John's mother, Alma, was living in the attic apartment. She was aging, frail, and John felt responsible for her care. And then there were the children. Patricia was 16, John Frederick was 15, Frederick was 13. John believed they were straying from their faith. Patricia had expressed interest in acting, something John saw as sinful. The boys were typical teenagers, more interested in sports and friends than church. In John's mind, his family was falling apart, spiritually, financially, morally. He saw only 2 options: accept welfare and face public humiliation, or save their souls the only way he knew how. On November 9th, 1971, John made his choice. That morning, John woke up early. He ate breakfast. He went over his plan one more time. His children left for school. His mother was upstairs in her attic apartment. His wife, Helen, was somewhere in the house. John retrieved 2 guns, his 9mm Steyr handgun and his father's .22 caliber revolver. He found Helen first. She was in the kitchen. He shot her in the back of the head. She died instantly. Next, he climbed the stairs to the attic and shot his mother, Alma, above her left eye. She fell where she stood. Then he waited. Patricia came home from school first. John shot her in the back of the head as she entered the house. Frederick arrived next. The same method, a single shot, quick, efficient. After the shootings, John made himself lunch. He calmly ate. Then he drove to his bank and closed his and his mother's accounts. From there, he went to Westfield High School and watched his oldest son, John Frederick, play in a soccer game. After the game, John drove his son home, but something went wrong. John Frederick must have sensed something. Maybe he saw his mother's body, maybe he saw the gun, because when John tried to shoot him, the boy fought back. Evidence later showed multiple misfires, John Frederick struggled. He tried to defend himself, but in the end, John overpowered him and shot him multiple times. Then came the cleanup. John dragged the bodies of his wife and 3 children into the mansion's ballroom. He laid them out on sleeping bags in a neat row. He left his mother's body in the attic. He went to his study and wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor. In it, he explained his actions. He said he saw too much evil in the world. He said he killed his family to save their souls. He believed that by doing this, they would go to heaven. Then, methodically, John cleaned the crime scenes. He removed his own face from every family photograph in the house. He tuned the radio to a religious station. He turned down the heat to help preserve the bodies. He stopped the mail, the milk deliveries, and the newspaper. He wrote notes to the children's schools and employers, saying they would be out of town visiting a sick relative in North Carolina. And then John Emil List walked out of Breeznole and disappeared. For nearly a month, no one suspected anything. The lights in the mansion stayed on all day and all night. Neighbors thought it was strange, but the List family kept to themselves. It wasn't unusual for them to be unseen for days. By early December, neighbors began to worry. The house was lit up, but no one ever appeared. One by one, light bulbs began to burn out, and still, no one came to replace them. On December 7th, police were called to check on the family. When officers entered through the unlocked basement window, the scene they found was horrifying. In the ballroom, under the ornate stained glass ceiling, lay 4 bodies: Helen, Patricia, John Frederick, and Frederick. In the attic, Alma. All had been shot in the head. All had been dead for weeks. The investigation began immediately. Police searched the house and found John's letter to his pastor. It was, essentially, a confession. But John was gone. The family's car, a green 1963 Chevrolet Impala, was found at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. But there was no evidence that John had boarded a flight. No credit card transactions, no sightings. John List had erased himself. A nationwide manhunt was launched. Hundreds of leads were followed. But John had destroyed every clear photograph of himself before leaving. Investigators had almost nothing to work with. Months turned into years. The case went cold. In August 1972, 9 months after the murders, Breeznole burned to the ground. The fire was ruled arson, but no suspects were ever identified. The Tiffany skylight, worth an estimated $100,000 at the time, was destroyed along with the house. The List family murders became a ghost story in Westfield, a cautionary tale. But John List was gone, and most people assumed he was either dead or would never be found. What investigators didn't know was that John had boarded a train the day of the murders. He traveled first to Michigan, then to Colorado. By early 1972, he had settled in Denver under a new name, Robert Peter Clark. He got an accounting job. He joined a Lutheran church. He became a member of the community. He even ran a carpooling service for church members who didn't have transportation. No one suspected a thing. In 1979, he took a job as comptroller at a paper box manufacturer, where he worked for 7 years. At a church gathering, he met a woman named Dolores Miller. She was kind, religious, and worked as a clerk at an Army PX. They began dating, and in 1985 they married. Dolores had no idea who her husband really was. In 1988, the couple moved to Midlothian, Virginia, a quiet suburb of Richmond. John, still using the name Bob Clark, found work at a small accounting firm. For 17 years, he lived a quiet, unremarkable life. He attended church every Sunday. He was polite, soft-spoken, and blended in perfectly. He was hiding in plain sight. But in 1989, everything changed. On May 21, 1989, the List family murders were featured on the television program America's Most Wanted. The show was in its first year, and the producers were looking for cold cases that could be solved with public help. They brought in a forensic artist named Frank Bender. Using old photographs and aging techniques, Bender created a clay bust showing what John List might look like 18 years after the murders. The bust was eerily accurate. Less than 2 weeks after the episode aired, a woman in Colorado who had once known John contacted the FBI. She had seen the broadcast, she had seen the bust, and she recognized Bob Clark. On June 1, 1989, John List was arrested at his accounting firm in Richmond, Virginia. At first, he denied everything. Even after being extradited to New Jersey, he insisted he was Bob Clark. But the evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints from his military records matched. Evidence from the crime scene tied him to the murders. On February 16, 1990, John finally confessed. After 18 years, he admitted his true identity. The trial began in early 1990. John List took the stand and explained in his calm, measured voice why he had killed his family. He said his financial problems had reached a breaking point. He couldn't face the shame of losing the house. He couldn't accept welfare. He couldn't bear the thought of his family suffering. He also spoke about his wife's alcoholism and the syphilis that had destroyed her mind. He talked about his mother's age and frailty. He talked about his children, who he believed were losing their faith. He said he killed them to save their souls. He believed that if they died before straying further from God, they would go to heaven. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that John suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. He saw the world in black and white. There were no grey areas, no middle ground. In his mind, there were only two choices: welfare or murder. The defense argued that John's judgment had been impaired. They claimed he suffered from post-traumatic stress from his military service. They even argued that the letter he left behind should be inadmissible because it was a confidential confession to his pastor. The court rejected both arguments. On April 12, 1990, John List was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, John tried to deflect responsibility. He said, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." The judge was not moved. He called John List a man without remorse and without honor. He said it was time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John Frederick to be heard. John was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He would not be eligible for parole for 125 years. John List spent the rest of his life in prison. Over the years, he gave a few interviews. In 2002, he spoke with journalist Connie Chung and said, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my actions and prayed for forgiveness ever since." When asked why he hadn't taken his own life instead of killing his family, he said he believed suicide was a sin that would have kept him out of heaven. He said he hoped to be reunited with his family in the afterlife. Whether he truly felt remorse or was simply trying to maintain his self-image as a religious man is something we'll never know. On March 21, 2008, John Emil List died of complications from pneumonia. He was 82 years old. He had spent 18 years of his life in hiding and another 18 years in prison. The New Jersey Star-Ledger referred to him as the boogeyman of Westfield. The List family murders remain one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history, not because of the brutality, but because of the cold calculation behind them. John List wasn't a man who lost control in a moment of rage. He planned every detail. He waited for his children to come home from school. He attended a soccer game. He made himself lunch. And then he walked away, believing he had done the right thing. This case raises questions that are hard to answer. How does a man who goes to church every Sunday, who teaches Sunday school, who presents himself as moral and upright, commit such an act? How does someone justify murder in the name of salvation? John List's upbringing, his father's rigid beliefs, his inability to handle failure, his religious extremism, all of these played a role. But at the end of the day, 5 innocent people were killed because one man couldn't face reality. Helen List was 47 years old. Alma List was 84. Patricia was 16. John Frederick was 15. Frederick was only 13. They deserved to live. They deserved a chance. What do you think about this case? Could something have been done to prevent it? Was John List truly remorseful, or was he just trying to justify his actions until the very end? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with others who are interested in true crime, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into real criminal cases. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.